All right. That way you can just make sure that you can hear us and they can see the screens and such, just in case I forget to switch who's being displayed there. Okay. So thank you everybody for joining. So on such short notice, we were originally scheduled to have, oh, that's very blurry. We were originally scheduled to have a talk on Linux basics, but real life got in the way because we have people here have to do work and NA time is happening. So our original speaker is quite busy. And so he bowed out, which I can totally understand. So Christine and I have been talking about doing this talk on diversity in IT for many moons. But I kept delaying it because I wanted to get it right. But I realized now I don't have the time to get it right. I have a new job. I haven't gotten rid of my old job. I have lots of hats that I'm wearing right now. But it's a talk that I think is really one that we should have. So it's going to be diversity in IT. Next week we'll have our much anticipated and much delayed UX talk on AR and VR. Hopefully it won't get like snowed out or something crazy again. But Christine is going to go up first, and I wanted to show the backlog here too as well. So I say this all the time, but if you want to give a talk, you don't have to be an expert in the talk or the topic. You just have to be willing to get up and speak. You can speak for as little as 5 or 10 minutes if you like. Just let us know so we can figure out how to schedule the sessions. There's, like I said, a number of things in the backlog, but you can, if it's not the topic you want to speak is not in the backlog, feel free just to let me know. Only thing we ask is that we don't try to sell people on things, and we try to pitch people on things. I think as developers, we all get repulsed by that sort of stuff. And that it'd be something that will probably be of interest to other people outside of your local group as well. So those are the only 2 criteria. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine. She's going to go first, and I'm going to finish working on my slides.
Okay. So I guess have you muted yourself?
I'm going to, as soon as I get to the right window.
All right. I have unmuted myself. Okay. So unfortunately, it's dark, actually, but I wore a shirt today that I thought was appropriate. I don't know if anybody can see it. This is Grace Hopper. Yeah. Nice. So seemed appropriate given the topic and given that it's Women's History Month. So if you don't know about Grace Hopper, she was an amazing computer scientist. She wrote the first compiler, and the work that she did on, I think, a system called Flowmatic, like a language called Flowmatic, with heavily influenced COBOL development, and she was involved at a fairly high level in the development of COBOL, like sort of the first high-level language that got used a lot. So, you know, we have her to thank for sort of a lot of her work on high-level languages that have now, you know, gotten even higher. So. All right, with that, let me share my screen. Okay. And so this was actually this was actually Andre's idea, I believe. And I thought it was a great idea because it's a perennial topic. And I feel like particularly in the last year or two, many of the issues around it have been in the news, for better or for worse. We're obviously both engineers and not experts in this at all, but maybe we have some perspective on it. So actually the first thing I did when I started doing these slides is I was like, well, you know, what do we actually mean by diversity in tech? Does anybody want to actually define what do we mean by diversity in tech? Because it's used all over the place, and then but nobody says really what specific things they're interested in. And then, you know, why do we care? Like, why do we even bother talking about this? Why do we spend so much time addressing the issue? And then, you know, assuming you think that there is a problem, like, what can we do to actually improve diversity? You know, assuming that you think that that's a good thing to do. I could not find anybody anywhere who wanted to give me a definition of what they meant by diversity in tech. I read all kinds of lay articles. I'm going to admit it's not like I went into like social research papers. But there were a couple of things that kept coming up. So one of them was sort of the lack of representation or participation of certain groups in tech, that might indicate a lack of diversity. And the other was this idea that if you have a workforce that is diverse, then your company or your organization or whatever it is going to come up with more diverse ideas because your workforce has more diverse life experiences to inform those ideas. So that was the best that I could come up with, was these sort of themes, but no actual definitions. So then the question is, like, what do we mean by diversity? Like, diversity in what? You know, gender, race, ethnicity, age, religion, you know, LGBT, veteran, disability, even just sort of like background. Like, were you raised in a rural area? Were you raised in the city?
Do you have a college degree or not?
Do you have a college degree or not? Education. Yes, I mean, you can go, there are so many things that you could add to this list. And if you Google for them, I'm sure you will find lots of discussions on them. So this is by no means an exhaustive list. So I'm going to be totally corny here. This is my corny slide, okay? So, like, if you ask people, like, what is a quote that defines the United States? Like, what were they thinking about when we were founded? This is, you know, one of those ones that you learn about when you're like 5. And while, you know, we might interpret it differently now than they interpreted it then, since most of them were, you know, like slaveholders, you know, if we evaluate that in 2019, it's a pretty powerful statement. And it is, you know, something that is part of the fabric of what it means to be American and what it means to be in America and, you know, what our values are. So for 2019, I'm going to interpret this statement as, you know, that your interests and your potential abilities, these things are evenly distributed at birth, and they're not dependent on your gender, they're not dependent on your race, they're not dependent on, okay, they're probably dependent on your age, because if you're a toddler, you usually don't have the same interests as a 20-year-old, but
I'm sleeping through
Napping.
Call back.
Exactly. But that, you know, generally speaking, if we're all created equal, then at least at birth, you know, these abilities are distributed evenly. Okay. Or at least not with regard to gender, race, these other things. Okay. But if you look at the tech industry does not match the demographics of the United States. So I'm going to admit that I went with, like, I can't verify like all of these data sources are completely accurate. I'm an engineer. I'm not studying social stuff. But this is a gorgeous graphic, therefore it must be true. And what it does, this is, I think, from 2017. Yeah. Is it looks at some of the top tech companies by gender and ethnicity. And I believe this is for the entire workforce, not necessarily for the tech workforce. So you can see that for the most part, like, women are very underrepresented. And as I said, I'm going to guess that if they actually looked at the tech workforce, it would be, you know, like, even more underrepresented. But that's speculation on my part. And of course, like, I love this when you look at the Fortune 500 CEOs, like there's 6 women. Like, crazy. Okay. So if you look at Latino and Black employees, they are also, for the most part, underrepresented in these. If you've been in engineering, you are aware that there are quite a few Asians who end up in engineering, so they would not necessarily be put in the underrepresented category. But this is sort of like, this is technology companies. We're not a company. I mean, we work for companies, but, you know, this is sort of, that's sort of Bay Area, if you will. So
It's more biased than most.
So I thought, well, it would be interesting to know about Goddard, but I don't know if you can actually get statistics for Goddard because we're this mix of contractors and federal employees. So you might be able to get federal employee numbers. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Goddard is not 60% Black. I'm just, in my experience working as an engineer here, I'm just going to make that broad statement, okay? But Prince George's County, like if you've lived here, I've lived here, I went to school here. It has a large percentage of Black residents. And so here we are in the middle of Prince George's County. And, Goddard is not really reflective of like the local population. And if you even look at the Washington area as a whole is a quarter Black. And like, which is also a big number and has not been reflective of my personal experience here at Goddard. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. Okay.
We're about 25% here in estimating.
All right. Well, that's impressive. My group is not. So, and in terms of women engineers, I just went with, women are usually about 50% and did not bother to get the statistic. Certainly I've never worked in a place with half women. I don't know. Yeah, Goddard. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to just say that Goddard is not necessarily representative of the ethnic and gender makeup of the area in which we are sitting. Okay. Motivation. Like, why do we care? Possibly if we care. There's a sense of fairness. Like, you tell kids you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up. Maybe we want to make that, more of a reality. Maybe we even think we have an ethical responsibility, possibly, to talk about this and see why things are the way they are and how you might change it. And maybe, given that, we're a beautifully capitalistic society, maybe we want a better bottom line. So maybe, maybe there's even an argument to say that, like, even if you don't care about ethics, even if what you're caring about is how much money you're making primarily, maybe this diversity discussion is actually still relevant. Okay. So, is diversity better for business? So McKinsey, which you may have heard of as a consulting company, they did some research in 2014 and then replicated it, I believe, in 2017, and found that organizations that were in the top quartile or something in terms of diversity, however they measured that, were also ones that were in the top in terms of returns. So sort of in the United States, on average, if your company is more diverse, you probably have higher returns. You could ask. You could question cause and effect there, right? But it's an interesting finding. There was this Forbes article from a couple years ago where they talked about hiring. Has anybody been involved in hiring? Anyone? Yeah. I mean, like, I've never hired anyone myself personally, but I've been involved in the hiring process. If you've been involved in hiring, you know that finding people is actually quite difficult. There's a lot of competition for talent. And so the argument here is, if you keep looking in the same places that everybody else is looking, if you keep following the same patterns that everybody else is following, then you're all going to be competing for this one group of techie people over here. But maybe if you change your hiring practices to increase the diversity of places you're looking for and the diversity of people you're looking at, then you widen your applicant pool and you potentially find people that others are not finding. So I thought that was kind of a nice argument. And then, okay, so I love this. Okay, so these are case studies. These are things that I've collected over the years and have gone looking for cases where businesses screwed up really badly. And you can't help but think that part of the reason that they screwed up so badly is because of like who they were employing to build these tools. So this is my favorite part. Okay, face recognition. Okay, so the New York Times did this study, or I guess they published the results of a study where they looked at facial recognition tools that were like on the market right now. And the tools had its task to evaluate people's gender from a photo. So, you know, there's lots of different tasks you can use. And so gender was misidentified in 1% of light-skinned males. It was misidentified in 35% of darker-skinned females. 35%, that's not even close, okay? 7% of light-skinned women, 12% of darker-skinned men. So, you know, if you think about it, gee, what photos were they using to train this system? Who was building this system? I'm going to go out on a limb and say it wasn't mostly darker-skinned females. I'm just, you know, I'm going to guess. And of course, this has a lot of implications because, you know, there's so many tools we use today. Like, if the tools are built in such a way that they don't work for you, then you end up getting excluded from these things. Okay, another amazing story. So this was from Wired. So this one I remembered when it came out that like Google has these automated tools for tagging photos. Okay, they were tagging photos of Black people as gorillas, which is so bad. I mean, especially given, like, if you've spent any time at all knowing anything about the history of racism in the United States, this is like, it's hard to imagine something worse, right? Like a worse error. So Google, turns out what they did to solve this problem is they actually just removed the tag gorilla. It's not that they corrected the photo, that they corrected the algorithm, okay? They just removed the tag gorilla. So you can't get Google to tag any photos as a gorilla because that's not part of its vocabulary. So again, it's hard to imagine that this thing went to publication and that huge numbers of people on the team had dark skin. It's just, yeah.
Does that chart include diversity on Google?
I don't remember. Sorry?
Your bets, you're going back. I would argue that the faucets around here are sensitive to people's skins.
Hey, that's part of my talk.
I noticed some of them work better when I have
Okay.
summer tan than in the winter.
So Google is
Wow, that's
2% Black. Okay. So, just like,
Yeah.
and remember that, I believe, is the workforce as a whole. I'm not sure that it's the tech. Okay, right, so another one.
Actually, if we go back to facial recognition,
Uh-huh.
I remember reading in an article that when they were developing photography itself,
Yes!
they used only white
Yes!
people. And so, like,
Yes!
I don't know how much, like, digital photography has fixed this problem, but, like,
Yes.
Black people literally did not show up well on camera
Yes.
to begin with. So-
Yes. It partly had, yes. So, like a camera cannot see as many light levels as we can. I think that's the issue. Like the film can't capture.
And they, like, optimized it for light skin.
Exactly. Although ironically, okay, so this is kind of funny. I went to school in Prince George's County. Every public school I went to, through high school was majority African American. I actually thought for many years that there was something wrong with me because, like, all of my school photos were totally washed out. I mean, it was known that, like, if you had paler skin, you needed to really put on makeup the morning that they did the school photos. And I did not even think of this until college.
I have a problem making the sensors in the water fountains come on. Because
Oh my gosh. Right, yes, exactly.
Yes, great point,
exactly. Yes, but that is exactly it, right? Like the people who design these things are often, okay. So speech I don't know if anybody else has any funny stories along these lines. Oh, okay, so until we get to
That's all right.
the talk. Okay, so speech recognition. Okay, algorithms tend to perform better on men than women. And of course, like we have so many devices now that can be voice activated, like your Alexa or Google Home if you have it, or like you're in your car if you have voice activated stuff. So this can be a real problem. And in this case, my PhD work was actually in sound, not in speech, but in sound. And I have to tell you that when you're a grad student, often it's hard to find data sets that fit like what you want exactly. And so you often make your own data sets. And so if the graduate students, you might make a small data set to get started, right, when you're trying an algorithm out. And so if your graduate students are mostly male, then, your data sets are probably going to be mostly male too. And, the early commercial data sets and things, are male. In fact, they would pick male voices because they are lower and there's more sort of frequency content that you read when you record it for various reasons. So this does not surprise me. Algorithms also tend to perform better on certain accents. So does anybody else have Google Voice? Anybody? No? My God, I love Google Voice. Could not live without it. So Google Voice is this system where you get a phone number and it will call your phone, or like your work phone, or however you want to direct it. One of the nice things it does, with that number rather than your actual cell phone number, one of the nice things it does is if somebody leaves a voicemail, it will send you an email with an automated text to voice transcript. Okay,
Oh
boy. Yeah, so the transcripts are right. It's hilarious, but usually you get some kind of vague idea of what it's about, right? Usually it's good enough that if you need to actually call them back. Okay, my parents are foreign, so they're native English speakers, but not American English speakers. And when I first got Google Voice, it would just throw up its hands. It just wouldn't even try. It would say, "You got a voice message." Yeah, yeah.
You get a little message that says, "Not transcribed."
Yes,
It's
yes,
hilarious.
yes. So, if you have, but apparently it's not even. You're right. So, you could sort of make the argument. Okay, well, your parents have a weird foreign accent, but it doesn't even work all that well for some American accents.
I remember my ex yelling
Right. So again, here you have things where the companies involved, the people who the people who test these things on day one are the people designing the tools. And if they're not representative of the group that they're trying to serve, then those tools are probably not going to work well for the people they don't represent. Hiring. I love this one. Okay. So, a place like Amazon hires tons and tons of people. So they tried to come up with an automated tool to rank applicants. As a lot of companies do this already, right? That you go through some kind of a filter and half of the resumes are thrown out before they even get in front of a human being. So Amazon developed this tool and they trained it on the basis of their historical hiring patterns. They abandoned the tool because what they discovered was words like women's, as in women's chess club captain, or other things that were gender associated with gender, would automatically get ranked lower by this tool that learned from their historical hiring record. So, you know, you have a lot of things where they say, oh, well, you know, we'll have a tool do it and it won't be biased because it's a tool. But if the thing going into it is biased, if the tool starts out, you know, then you can end up with a tool, bad tool. I don't know if this also meant that they went and thought about their hiring practices. But, you know, all right. Okay. So the next slide, this gets a little hairy. Okay. And so I thought many ways of talking about this. So one of the things that I loved when I was a kid about math and science was that there was a right answer. And like, if I said that 3 + 5 = 8, that was the right answer. And there was like an objective reality that we were measuring things against. And if I solved some problem and I got the right answer, then like nobody was going to argue with me. And it didn't matter if I came up with the right answer or one of my classmates came up with the right answer. It didn't matter who you were. If you came up with the right answer, there was this objective thing that we were measuring against, and therefore everything was a meritocracy, right? And so people make that argument about the IT industry. They're like, you know, a computer doesn't care if you're male or female. Like, if you build this tool and people like it, then, you know, or, you know, if it works, then, you know, people will recognize that and you will get kudos. And it sounds great. But like, not everything that happens in technology is rated by these perfect objective standards. So that Amazon hiring thing that I just showed, right? Here we have a quote unquote objective tool that was rating women lower for, you know, rating resumes lower for having things that said women in them, which is ridiculous. And just like on a personal note, like in my own family, in my parents' generation, my father's middle sister, she went to an all-girls high school that was considered a really good school, but did not offer science. Like it's unimaginable now, right? But it was considered a good school, didn't offer science. So the way the schools worked in South Africa at that time was that if you hadn't studied science in high school, you could not study science in college. So when she got to college, she was very limited in what she could actually study. She told my grandmother to send my dad's youngest sister to a different school where she was actually able to study science. And my dad's youngest sister has a PhD in chemistry because, you know, she was able to take that route, right? So if you're never even given the opportunity to learn the things that allow you to become an engineer or become a scientist, then it's not a meritocracy because there's people who had no path to even get there, right? And on the other side of my family, my mother's older sister was really good at math. She took one of those tests in high school that says, oh, you know, you should become this, this, or this, whatever it's called. Aptitude test. Yeah, I don't think anybody, I never did one. I don't know if you, in middle school. Okay. Right?
It seems like a weird time to do it, but you know.
That's why I took mine. I kind of went down that route.
So there you go. So my aunt took this aptitude test, and when they told her the results, right, which you would think is sort of an objective measure, when they told her the results, they said to her, you know, you'd actually be good at engineering. But, you know, we don't recommend that you study engineering, okay? Because if you get through the engineering program, no one will hire you as an engineer. And if they do hire you, you're going to have to go out in the field. You're going to have to work with like construction crews and things. The construction crews are going to be filled with men who aren't going to want to listen to you, so you won't be able to do your job. So my aunt has been a fabulous math teacher for, you know, high school math teacher for all of her career. But, you know, engineering is not a meritocracy. She was told not to even bother to try because she was female. And, you know, obviously, I'm talking about the 70s at this point, right? So you think, okay, well, times have changed, and they certainly have. But, you know,
Still not.
yeah, there's still.
There was a robotics
Huh?
class in my middle school. It was
Well, you
basically
gotta
like
get
the
on
Lego
board.
robotics like competition team. They purposely did not invite girls to join.
Wow.
And so my friend, I found out too late that I could have done that, but like she like fought the administration so that she could be on the robotics team.
Wow. Wow.
Right.
So, there are, the tech industry should not hide behind this idea that everything it does is completely objective, and therefore the people who are lauded in tech are there purely on merit, and that anybody who didn't make it there purely because they didn't have the skills or whatever to get there. Okay. Personal. Okay, so this one's even harder to talk about. I was so naive when I started in engineering. I thought that sexual harassment was something that had happened, like to my parents' generation. I thought that we'd solve these problems, that like people, that if harassment existed, it was very rare, that there were like a few bad people here and there who hadn't caught up with the times. And now that I've been in engineering for longer, sort of like the longer I am, the more people I talk to, the more experiences I've had. It's just not the case that sexual harassment is gone. It really isn't. It's happened to me. It's happened to a lot of the women that I talk to. I mean, I'm not going to put the ladies in the room here on the spot, but it would not surprise me if it had happened to them because, it happened to my friends. And I mean, some of this, we're talking, varying degrees here. But one of the things when you look at like women in engineering is even the ones who get to that point, who graduate and start careers in engineering, they leave. And one of the reasons they leave is this, that they end up in environments where they're harassed, and either, sometimes management doesn't care, sometimes it does care but doesn't know what to do about it. And it just, if why spend 30 years somewhere where people make you feel uncomfortable and feel like you don't belong there? So a lot of women also, they don't report these things. They don't tell their managers, right? Especially like if the structure of management is all male, and if the person who's harassing you is in power in some manner, and you feel like you are lower on the totem pole, like you're new or whatever it is, and they're a more important employee, then maybe you don't say anything. Or if that person has control over certain resources that you may need in order to do your job, and you worry about retaliation, then maybe you don't say anything. So I'm just going to kind of leave it there unless anyone else would like to, yeah.
But you hear about the Google scandal?
Yes!
So
my gosh!
So Andy Rubin, the creator of Android, he was accused of misconduct, but he walked away with $90 million severance package. And another executive at Google walked away about $45 million in severance package, and they were both accused of misconduct.
Right.
And the thing was that the CEO, Larry Page, he went around the board to get them those severance packages. He didn't go through the board. He did it and it's only revealed because of the court documents reveal it. So you think it's kind of like, the big the do no evil guys,
right,
would never do that.
Right.
Well, surprise.
Yes.
Yeah, and and as far as I know, it wasn't like stocks or something, but yeah, it was a lot of money.
And you look at that and you say, like, well, what does that say about how you value women in your organization? Like, what are you telling your female workforce when you do that?
It's pretty disappointing too also. And then the thing about it too also, that's what I know of because of court filings. So if you extrapolate it for there's companies that forced you to go through arbitration.
Yep.
It's probably way, way higher than that.
Yep. And so I feel like when you're thinking about diversity in tech, and you're wondering like where all the women are. This, you know, is one part of the picture, in my opinion. Okay. So what can we do to improve diversity if we assume that this is something we'd like to do, right? I think it would be great. So diversity training. I've never done diversity training. Has anybody ever actually gone through one of these? Okay. I've heard they're horrible.
They're kind of interesting because I found myself being in the minority a lot of times, which was really interesting to think of it that way. And
diversity dialogue project.
yeah, it was more of the dialogue thing.
The diversity dialogue project, because I'm in that right now, so I've only had like 2 sessions, but that seems to be working better than the other ones that I've been in. Granted, they were not at NASA, because what generally happens is that, well, first of all, I think they're way too short because like there's just so much to unpack. Like 2 hours is not going to cut it,
Right.
but like. What always ends up happening, I've noticed, is that the most marginalized people in the room spend a lot of emotional labor explaining, like, you know, these are things that have hurt me in the past. This is why it's hurtful. These are my experiences. And then the people who are less marginalized in the room just kind of say, oh, okay, and then don't do anything about it. And in fact, often go on to replicate that exact same behavior. And so you're like, great, I just gave you ammo to use against me, instead of like feeling like, oh, we had a productive conversation.
Right. Right. So apparently in a lot of situations, diversity training is not the answer. I think in this one, it talks particularly about like mandatory diversity training, where you get everybody in the company to sit there and have somebody present about it and talk about unconscious bias and, you know, other things. And what ends up happening is, which I understand, nobody wants to be in the hot seat thinking, oh, you know, this training is telling me that I'm a horrible person, or, you know, nobody wants to feel that way, right? But it often doesn't work and might even make things worse. So we're agreeing this is not diversity training. It's totally not diversity training. Okay. Although I would say that if you're interested in the topic, I had never heard of unconscious bias until a few years ago, a presentation that was done here at Goddard, and it is fascinating. So I do recommend, actually. It explains things like why when I walk in a room and I'm an engineer and I'm female, I assume that the dudes are the engineers and not the women. You know? Yes. Yes. That I have to have this moment where I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. Let's, you know. So anyway, what can we do to improve diversity? I love this webpage. I have read through a lot of it, not all of it. There's a lot that goes on in here. This is from a company that was created by Ellen Powell, I believe that's how her name is pronounced. You may remember a story from several years ago about a woman in Silicon Valley who sued her company for gender bias. They were like a VC firm, venture capital or something. And then she became CEO of Reddit. So she lost the court case. There was she got a lot of trolls kind of like attacking her. Then she went and became CEO of Reddit and did things like said, forbid revenge porn on Reddit. I mean, like, oh, how horrible to prevent, and people got very, very mad at her. So after she left that, she created this company. And it has a whole bunch of suggestions, from like culture to hiring to how to, sort of the whole sort of process as a company to try and make your company a welcoming place for all your employees. And it has all kinds of references. In fact, some of the things that I referred to in this talk, I actually stole from here. So I recommend, like, you can kind of go through it at a high level, and then you can sort of dig down into some of these. Like in hiring, it turns out that weirdly, like, just the way the language you use in your job description can drastically change who applies for your job, even if it's like basically the same requirements. So sometimes just rewriting your job descriptions can lead to a more diverse set of people applying. So I recommend it. And I think that was my last slide.
Kareem also had an academic reference that he wanted to mention. Elk Dunker wrote a seminal work on value-centric design. It's titled Cross-Cultural Usability of the Library Metaphor.
Cool.
So in that paper, he basically explored the challenges of managing a library in a Maori community in New Zealand. So there were lots of insights. He also mentioned the second one, an amazing ACM venue. Computer-supported cooperative work started an initiative to promote academic research on issues related how diversity and inclusion influence technology and the way we use it.
Cool.
So I guess at some point, after the talk, we can include these in the show notes. Yeah.
Sure. All right. So.
Okay. So shall I mute?
Good to go.
Okay.
All right.
Are you present? There we go.
Yep. All right. So, starting off, explain the shirt now. my sister who gives awesome presents. I have a 6-month-old at home. So when he was born, he's my first boy. I have two girls before that. So he looks like me apparently. So she bought me this shirt. It was Control C and his says Control V, which is pretty awesome. So it's one of my favorite shirts. That said, let's actually. Yep. All right. So originally, Christine and I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about diversity, and it spoke about diversity in a perspective I had not heard before, which I really, really enjoyed. It was like a breath of fresh air. It was like the opposite of that training thing that Christine mentioned before, because I've been through those and I'm like, this seems like it just pisses off people that are not in the minority. You know, so this is going to be a slight reflection of what I heard there. And again, Christine and I started talking about it. I put it in the backlog. Christine saw it and we started talking about it. Said, hey, we should have this talk on diversity in IT here, and have it not be the traditional thing of what we've seen before. We were slated to do this many months ago, but my fault. It was such a topic that was important to me that I wanted to get it right. So I kept putting it off because I had a lot of things going on. But we're going to do it today. Hopefully it'll make sense. I have like 100 slides. We're not going to go through all of them, but I only had like 100 words. So that I can give you kind of where this is going. Yeah, let's get started. So a little bit about me. You already know my name, husband and father. Like I said, I have in total 6 months ago, I had a house full of women. That was it. And
Is that why you don't look happy?
That's every picture, trust me. The application development lead for the contract that I'm on, just took over another role as a 450 IT lead, application developer, went to Maryland, child of 2 immigrants, blah, 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 blah. Just want to give a little background on that. So let's talk roadmap of what we're going to actually talk about at my notes. Yeah. My notes are in this other one, so this is gonna be more or less like a conversation. It's not gonna speak directly to the slides. We don't have a lot of time, and we're just gonna run through them.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I think what we're gonna end up doing, one of the things that we wanted to do for this talk, one of the ideas was to have Christine did it from a perspective different from what I'm doing it from, and we wanted to mix the two together so that the talk would be an example of diversity in action, of having multiple voices from multiple perspectives talking about the same things and how we approach those things. That was
idea.
Yeah. So that idea proves a certain point that diversity is hard. It's not easy, right? You have to work for it. It's not going to be the thing that comes naturally to you. So eventually we're going to get to this question. What does the Apple Watch, Tesla, and a soap dispenser have to do with diversity? And we've kind of touched on some of these things already, but that's been my punchline for as I was going around telling people this talk is coming up. I would ask them that question, and you guys kind of already get the point of some of that already, but we'll touch on it a little bit later. So, what do I mean when I say diversity? I do not mean Black, white, women, all age differences. That's not what I mean by diversity. Now, I believe those things are proxies for diversity, right? By having women on your team, you're going to get a certain thought process into there. You're having younger people, older people, different types of people. You're going to have different thoughts that come up. But for me, what I mean by diversity is diversity of thought. Okay? If you have a bunch of people that photographically look different, they all have the same background, they all exactly think the same, I argue that you do not have diversity, right? And it was brought up before about the hiring practices. I've been on panels of people being hired where it was evident to me that they were hiring for culture fit, which is more or less like, you got to fit into what we already have, right? Because like I said, that's easier, right? You don't want someone coming in rocking the boat, right, so to speak. You want that harmonious kind of group, so to speak, right? And because that's easier to do, I'll say that. And Christine mentioned a point about bias. We all have bias. If you don't think you have biases, because you're not looking hard enough. So we all have biases, but the point is, how do you compensate for those biases, right? Are you aware of those biases? I'll give you an example. If you go into the lunchroom and you don't know anyone, and there's different groups of people sitting at different tables, which group do you sit with? Which group do you approach?
The empty table.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, were you leaving
Possibly.
and eat somewhere else?
Possibly, yeah. So you tend to gravitate towards the people that you think have the things most in common with you, right? So let's say you are an engineer, and there's a group of engineers sitting there, and there's another group of scientists and another group of, teachers. You're probably going to sit with the engineers, right? If you can somehow label that they are engineers, right? But you tend to go towards the people that you're already familiar with. Blank slide. Okay, so my take on this whole diversity thing is, I'm just going to talk, and I'm just going to show you a couple of images, because diversity is all around us, right? Diversity is in nature. It's in everything that we do. And it makes things better. Imagine if you had everyone, or every landscape was all one color. What would that be like? You know what I mean? It wouldn't actually be very useful, right? Yeah. Slight disclaimer, I hate doing disclaimers like this, but I started writing this talk at 11 o'clock last night. That is typical, but again, I did not want to do this. I've been thinking about this for a long time. And a lot of the points I wanted to cover, Christine already covered. So we're going to try to just skip over those things and talk mostly. No, perfectly fine, because I think it shows the point, right? Of some of the things that are not necessarily in the training, but it's like the real world, like, and how do we address those things, right? So we do want change, but what does that actually look like, right? How can we affect those sorts of things?
And being distracted. Where is that?
I don't know. So I'm gonna again. Last night I found this really, really awesome website that gives a bunch of pictures. I thought about the concept of how I wanted to do this, and it literally was just show you a bunch of pictures. Like I said, I have hundreds of slides, but again, all the words have already been put up there. There's only like 2 more words later, right? Because I want to illustrate the point of what is diversity, right? We have diversity in a lot of things we do. No one eats the same food every single day, right? Like my parents are from Jamaica, right? And growing up here in the 80s, 90s, Jamaicans weren't the most popular people, so I didn't tell anyone that was, right? But every once in a while, a reference will leak out. I'm like, I love curry goat. What? You eat goat? That's ridiculous. Has anyone actually had curry goat before?
Okay, my parents, yeah.
It is freaking amazing, awesome. Right?
Actually, I gotta stop eating because it's so good.
It's so good, right? But the point is, what if you stopped and said, that's outside of my norm, I'm not going to try that, right? Would you ever experience that sort of thing? And that's kind of what we have with our hiring practices and our engineering and groups and that sort of thing. There are things that are easier, the things that already come natural to us in the environments that we're already in. And so we gravitate towards that, right? And so that what ends up happening is that we don't get those experiences, we don't get those other things in that would actually change our opinions on some of those things. There are a few images that I really want to bring in, but then for some reason I think they were too large, and I didn't have time to resize them down and bring them down. So you may see a couple slides that are like, it's weird, but
You're making me hungry.
yeah, I'm sorry. So,
Hey, why don't we keep getting pizza here?
so I won't let that cat out the bag, but every once in a while we do diversify the food. We don't advertise it beforehand because then people just come for the food. But for the regulars, you know that every so often we get some nice food in. But let me kind of run through this really quickly. So other examples of diversity include our programming, right? How many different languages do we have, right? And they fit different purposes. They were built at different times, and they're useful for different things, right? Let's say I'm a C# developer. If I try to use C# to solve every single problem, I'm gonna have a hard time building a progressive web app, right? Or I'm gonna have a hard time doing something that's innately functional, right? But there's different tools that we can use to leverage those sorts of things. The industry as a whole, although it has a lot of problems with diversity, it does recognize the value of it. A good example of that is DevOps, right? What is DevOps all about, right? Exactly, right? So there you have an example of diversity in action, right? You have a dev probably in there, some operations people, some security people, some product people perhaps, right? Maybe a database person. Yeah, stakeholders. You have all these people working together. And again, what is the diversity there? It's diversity of thought. Each person comes at the problem from a slightly different angle. The developer says, oh, I'm going to write this elegant code. The security person says, well, what about this flaw? The operations say, oh, well, how are we going to deploy it, right? How are we going to maintain it over time? Is it maintainable? The product person is like, does it actually solve the user's problem? You know, that sort of thing. So you have all these different thoughts coming into play, right? And then the end product is better for it, right? So that's another form, again, of diversity. Like I said, from my perspective, diversity is really about diversity of thought, right? And again, you get that proxy. If you have a bunch of people that all have the same background, all look the same, you might still have diversity of thought, but chances are you're going to have less of it, right? So again, what you see is a proxy of what was going on internally, right? Other points here. All right, so to mention those unconscious biases, right? So what are some ways you can probably work around that? So let's say, for example, you're hiring.
Are people familiar with the idea of unconscious bias? Like just, okay.
Yeah, actually.
They're doing better than I was like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been around long enough. With AI, the unconscious bias gets built. People put it in. It's in the algorithms, and they don't realize what you're doing.
Yeah. So let's say, how do you combat some of those things? And let's just say on a higher part, this is just my opinion, right? And I've had a couple groups that say, you know, that do the same things. Let's say you're on a panel, you're gonna bring people in. First, think about how you word the job rec, right? Think about where you post that job rec. If you post it in a certain, if you only post it in Ivy League schools, then by definition, we've included bias, right? Because there's bias getting into those Ivy League schools, right? If we word it certain ways, then we're going to exclude people unnecessarily as well. It's been said that if there are 10 qualifications, males will tend to apply if they have 3 or 4, right? Women don't tend to apply unless they have like 9 or 10, right? So how do you word your job recs to include more people, right? But now that you've got a bunch of applicants in, now what are you going to do, right? You, as a panel, you got to figure out what you're going to do. You need to ask the same questions of everyone, right? To eliminate those biases right there. You got to figure out what the answers that you're looking for from those questions are. Why are you asking the questions? You know, what kind of bias is involved in the question itself? You know, if I, sorry, train of thought. Then you need to, well, not need to. one of the things I think we should do is put a scoring thing in there beforehand, right? So let's say we're asking 10 questions and there's a point system of 10 each, or depending on what things you deem as a group as more important, maybe this one has 20, this one has 5, whatever the case may be, right? Then each person score individually, right? And then compare notes, right? If I have this person out of 0 to 10 as a 9, and you have them as a 3 on a particular question, we have a disconnect. I heard something you didn't hear. You saw something I didn't see. Let's figure out what that is. But now you have a starting point by which you can judge those sort of things, right? You need to take notes and that sort of thing. So what ends up happening, here's where the unconscious bias comes in again. If you're not taking accurate notes ahead of time, you're not knowing what you're looking for, then something someone says can color your whole experience of them afterwards, right? That unconscious bias comes in, right? Or what naturally happens, because we are all engineers and we think with the logical brain. What we tend to do is come up with an opinion and then we find things to back that opinion up afterwards, right? But if you have that system in place and not have the system generate dynamic, dictate the whole thing, there needs to be a conversation there. But it can drive that conversation to bring out those unconscious biases. When you have to explain why you rated this person a 10 and the other person rated them a 3, you got to explain that. And if you can't explain it properly, then maybe there's unconscious bias there. And that goes both ways, right? You can have, like, I'm more comfortable with this person. Like, I've been on a hiring panel where afterwards, one person said, let's hire the person. And I'm like, I want to have a beer with them too, but I don't want to do his work because he don't know what he's doing. But again, having those things set up ahead of time, thinking about it ahead of time so that you can have a thoughtful process to eliminate that unconscious bias.
So if I can just jump in.
Yes, by all means.
There was this fascinating, it wasn't a study. So elite orchestras, it used to be overwhelmingly male. Yeah. So in, I don't know when it was, 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s, they started this process where for the initial screening, they would actually have the person applying behind a screen so that the panel did not know who that person was. And the reason they did this had nothing to do with gender or race. That's not what they were trying to achieve. What they were trying to make sure is that people weren't favoring the students of their teachers, because there's a lot of, it's kind of in a lot of people, the student of my teacher's student kind of thing. And when they started doing this, they discovered that more women were getting through the initial screening process.
There you go.
So some companies have heard what they will actually do for the initial screening process is remove names. Because your name can actually say quite a lot about who you are, like maybe your ethnicity or your gender. And so there are some things like that as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that. So you
also
notice
had to put carpeting on the floor because they found that
heels.
actually the sound of heels clicking on the floor would cause unconscious bias against those women who were wearing heels. And so then they were like, okay, I guess we're gonna put a carpet there. And then it was like, oh wow, all these women are suddenly being hired.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that.
So another thing we have to consider too is the culture in which we're in, right? So as we were doing notes, like we were trying to put the notes together and we were putting one of the things like interest. Like I am a sci-fi nerd geek through and through. So I was putting things in like, hey, yeah, starships and Millennium Falcon, and Christine was like, I don't care about any of those things. Right? So again, what culture do we have? We have that bro culture, you know what I mean? Where it's gonna be off-putting to other people, right? What kind of culture are we putting in? That's when it goes into that whole culture fit thing again as well. Thinking about examples, it was I used to play basketball. I haven't done it since my 6-year-old was born, but I used to. So if you had a basketball team, for example, you had the whole team full of guards, right? A whole team full of centers. They would not be as effective. Even if they were the best guards or the best centers, a good diverse team will beat a homogeneous team of good players almost every single time, right? And so there's examples of this diversity all around us that we may just not think about, but they exist all over the place, right? So why does it matter? And again, I was hoping to eventually, once I give this talk again, I'm going to try to put the pictures to the theme of the thing, but I didn't have time to do that. And I really wanted to get the pictures in. So,
I think you're lacking puppies. I haven't seen a puppy yet.
it's coming. Wait a minute, we might have gone past. I don't know. There was at least one puppy. I try not to be too puppy heavy because I'm not a cat person. Again, unconscious bias that I try to compensate for. Crap, what was I going? No, it's all right. All right. The Apple Watch thing. Eventually we're going to get there, but I don't know if we have how much time we have. So the Apple Watch, when it first came out, was interesting. They touted the Apple Watch as being the most comprehensive fitness tracker out there. Right? And it does amazing, awesome things. But you know what thing it does not do?
Hold a charge for it.
Yeah, that too, maybe. I don't know. But it does not track women's menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
There's 50% of the population. Like 80% of them.
And then also you got to worry about the legal ramifications to that too. Also.
Yeah, but the whole point is what they.
They were
Can you
like
imagine?
tracking like blood pressure and
It was all type of extra extraordinary things, right? But here's the point though, is do you think that there were no women on the team that built that? What do you think?
I think there were. They just didn't do that.
So that's another point, right? Having a token person on your team does not equal diversity, right? If that person is not able to speak up, if they're not able to be heard, right? If their inputs are not taken into account, it does not matter that they're there, right? That is not diversity because, again, what is the definition of diversity as I'm putting it? The diversity of thought. And if their thoughts were not considered, then you still have a non-diverse team, right? So why does this matter? Again, it affects us in the real world. And here's where it goes back to the whole dispenser thing, right? So I found this little guy, and I thought this was interesting. All right. That happened. Now that happened too.
Every day.
All right. This is not just a Garter thing.
It's a design problem.
It's actually the manufacturer.
Yeah.
Well, but you know, Goddard could go to the manufacturer and say, "We're not buying."
Put the napkin in.
Wait for it. Wait for it. Wow. All right. So that one in itself is nice because it's funny, right? In some ways. But here's how it extrapolates out. Remember I was saying how the soap dispenser, Apple Watch, and what's the last one? Tesla. So what is Tesla pioneering? Self-driving cars. Now, if the models of which these self-driving cars have innate bias, and I have 2 young black little girls, they're not part of the model. The model doesn't recognize them. What happens to that? There you go. Right? Yeah. So if the models, if the people themselves that are building this are not diverse, and the data that they're using to train these models are not diverse, what impact does it have in the real world, right? Because AI is being used more and more in places that you just would not consider it. If the models themselves are amplifying the bias, because what ends up happening is the model doesn't just copy the bias, it amplifies the bias, right? Because there's no human brain in there to figure out, like, wait a minute, this is inappropriate, you know what I mean? So it amplifies those biases, and it can cause real problems in the real world later on. Right?
So it's not even AI. It turns out with cars, the crash test dummy that is used for safety testing is, I was just reading an article about this, was designed for a man in terms of the weight distribution, in terms of the size, in terms of the height. So because women tend to have our weight distributed a bit differently, and our bones, you know, and our size and everything is a little different, we tend to be closer to the steering wheel, for example. Women, even though women are in fewer accidents than men, women are injured. You know, when there is an accident, women are more severely injured than men, in part because of these crash test dummies. And in fact, they won't even, like, you think that the obvious solution to this would be to mandate having female crash test dummies in your crash tests as well, right? Well, some of these companies, their female crash test dummy is a male crash test dummy that's scaled down. Like, I'm gonna guess that they don't have boobs, just as an example. And like women do for the most part. You can't just scale it down.
Yeah.
So even without AI, there are a lot of things that are designed that aren't, for everyone.
Exactly. And this picture really spoke to me. It's like, this is my daughter, and that's the machine, and how is that interaction going to go? And here's the thing about it: are most times these biases intentional? They're not. It's not an evil thing where people. I think sometimes people, again, with the training that we do, it makes it out to be like this some intentional thing, and some percent of the time it is intentional, but that's a small percentage of the time. What's most time is unintentional. It's just because they didn't think about it, didn't consider it. Like, for example, there was a car maker, I can't remember who it was, who made their engineers, so they were all male, dress up in skirts and heels, and then try the car out. Say, you can't get into the car with the skirt on.
And there's nowhere to put your purse.
And there was nowhere to put your purse. We got the glove compartment because of that, right? So again, it's that if you have someone in that team that can bring up these things and have a voice to bring those things up, then you end up with more diverse thought. You end up with a better product, like saying, and a better bottom line, if that's what you care about, right? At the end of the day, right? So how can you help as well? There's one thing in there in the talk that I can remember. I forgot to put it in my notes, but I'll make sure I put it in there. It's a concept called lending privilege. I thought this was so awesome, right? So what do you think lending privilege actually means? All right. So, no, you can say.
I'm like, I've heard this term several times.
Yeah. No, go ahead, by all means. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, basically, I guess the idea is that if you have privilege in some form, you use that to amplify the voice of somebody who lacks that particular privilege, or to amplify kind of the viewpoints of that person.
Yeah. So I've been in meetings where someone is really soft-spoken, but they have great ideas, right? But a soft-spoken person will not be heard. But if you are one of those people that speak a little louder, you can say, "Hey, Christine, what's your thoughts on the matter?" No, I'm just but the point being is, like, if I have the floor, I can lend the floor to someone that does not normally get a chance to speak, and therefore I'm lending my privilege in that regard to that person, right? And that's something we can actually do on a day-to-day basis.
I got a funny story about that. So I had this coworker. She's small. She her voice is small. She would always sit next to me. I would listen to her, and I would basically repeat what she said. It was hilarious. And she would always be like this. That's why I sit next to you. I need you to just amplify my ideas. Her ideas are good. It's just the fact that she just did not speak up.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah. So again,
like, those are your ideas. Like, Judge Westbrook, no, that's her ideas. She just wanted me to say it.
Yeah.
No one could hear it.
Yeah.
And some people, while they got great ideas and work on their own, they get in front of the group and they just free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's true too.
It's like some people it's like an accident. I did that with a contractor one time.
Sorry.
So yeah. So again, one of the concepts, and like I said, there was a bunch of other things in there that I didn't have time to put in notes, and we don't have time to necessarily talk about today. But I thought that one was really, it's a nice actionable thing that we can do. And here's the key point is that you may be the person being lent privilege in one example, and you may be the one lending in another example. Think about how you yourself can lend privilege to someone else, right? And explain to them, hey, this is what we're doing, so that they can be aware of it, and they can in turn do it later on as well, right? So I like this hands one too, because I specifically looked at hands, but it's like, let's get to work, right? The whole thing about it is like, I think, what was her name? Yeah. Keon. She brought up before, like, you have these trainings and then people are like, oh, that's great, that's awesome, and then do nothing about it, right? We have to actually work at it. And here's the thing, it's gonna be uncomfortable, right? It's not gonna be the easiest thing to do. It takes work, it takes effort, but if we look at the situation, which I actually got that one in there, right? Look at the situation. And no one got that, so I got one in. I got the hands thing too, is the work, getting to work. we can find ways that we can help to improve the situation. On a small scale, right? We're not going to solve the whole industry, but you can solve it locally. Then what ends up happening, we all, for the most part, tech people don't tend to stay in one place very long. If you solve it there and you help that person, and they give them the tools to solve it, which I suppose I have a tools one here, but it wouldn't come in. Then they can take that where they go with it, right? So here's the thing. This is where this one comes in. Have fun with it, right? Like every time I've gone to one of these trainings, it's like a depressing thing. You know what I mean? It's like people you leave like oh, this is horrible. We're never gonna fix it, or they're angry because they're like, I didn't get here just because of my privilege, or whatever. Try not to make it that way. Have fun with it. Figure out a way that you can incorporate those things in to make it enjoyable as your people are going about it, and not unapproachable, right? Meditate, think about these things. I'm trying to get it in. I did think about it towards the end, but again, have fun with it. Blaze a path, right? All right, I'm running out of them now, but yeah. So again, I think this is one of the last slides. Diversity is our advantage, right? And again, it's not necessarily a diversity of what people look like around a table, because you can have all different types of people around a table and still not have diversity. By a couple of reasons that we talked about before. You can all have the same background, you can all think the same. You could be in a situation where if you think differently, you get reprimanded for it, right? Or you can be in a situation where no one actually listens to you. You are the token whatever. You know what I mean? Again, that's not diversity. So again, that website, pretty awesome. All the images for the most part came from this one website. So that's my one reference.
Royalty free, you don't have to get attribution.
I didn't have time to check them. Yeah. They say ask you to, and I was like, hey, I'm with, of course. And they have an awesome API too as well. I'm probably going to use later on. I can just pull these images, throw them in the talk when I have to copy them and move them into the slides later on. But so that was some of it. Let me try to hold on. Trying to think if there's anything that I didn't cover that Christine didn't cover. All right, so that was all. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's it. We'll try. I think we're gonna try to do this again, or I'm gonna try to do this again because I want to spend some more time in it. So we'll put it back into the backlog. I'm not sure when it will happen again. I want to try to get that whole integrate multiple people, because we're gonna do. Christine knows it's like, hey, we should get another person in that represents this other group and from a different perspective. Like, we're both devs or engineers. We need an SA or security person to get into this talk and talk about it from that perspective and weave the whole talk together. It's just hard. Yeah, designers. Designers are cool. I just don't know any.
Yeah, I don't know any visual designers.
I know one.
I work with you guys all the time.
Oh, you're a designer?
Yes.
Oh, well, hello.
Yes. Eunice and I work for the same company.
Stick around for a few minutes afterwards. All right. So yeah, that's about it. Is there any other comments online?
Yeah, no, that's it.
That's it. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. Please take the pizza with you. Please sign the sign-in sheet as well.
Right here for anybody that hasn't.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
All right.
Your tag, you and Christine are tagged on the comment that.
Okay.
They're on there.
All right. So we're gonna sign off.